Many of us get in relationships just not to go for too long a period of time of being alone, because we fear being alone, and because some of us, sometimes it affects our self-esteem when we are out of relationships for too long a periods of time. We start feeling that we're not wanted or undesirable, so we just get in the relationship just to pass time. Ayelah Van Zandt calls it in the meantime. You heard of in the meantime relationships? You're not the one that I want, but you'll do in the meantime. I care for you, but not quite love you, and I hope you don't quite depend on me because I don't know if I'm going to be emotionally available for you. So, but you'll do in the meantime. Most of us, we're not aware that the disintegration of relationships that's happening to us now is the result of the disintegration of the relationships of our elders 1 to 2 generations before us. I repeat, the disintegration of our relationships are the result of the disintegration of the relationships of our elders 1 to 2 generations before us. Probably half the room right now are the products of split parentage. That's supposed to be shocking to African folks, but it's no longer shocking. 20 years ago, that was shocking information. Now it's the norm. It's no big deal that you've been raised by a single parent. So the disintegration of the relationships of the elders 1 to 2 generations before us, whether it was talking about intimate relationships, political relationships, society, or organizational relationships. In the past 5 years, the conscious community been hit with plenty of breaking up of many of the more prominent leaders that we look up to. Those who wrote books on relationships, those who counseled us through some of our relationships, or how to conduct ourselves in relationships, or how to attract relationships. Many of those relationships failed, so now it's trickling down to the normal folk. It's like disease and health. In the metaphysics of disease is you start manifesting symptoms first. Then it takes approximately 5 years for the disease to totally precipitate down upon you if you don't take any precautions. So the same things happen with the generations before us. The relationships disintegrated, and we've done nothing to remedy it, and now it's precipitating upon us. There's an African proverb. It says, when the head is sick, the body is sick. So that is a lesson to those of us that are leaders, or propose ourselves to be leaders, to take our leadership serious. Leadership is not anything to play with. Leadership in the African society is forever. You don't play with it, you don't quit. You do it till you die. You do it till your successor comes, or you do it until you're disqualified, but there's no quitting.
Good evening. Welcome to Divine Speech in African Traditionalism. I am your host, Augustine Ayinibisah Ayelah. To seek permission to speak, I rise before my father and mother, the two individuals who taught me right from wrong. I rise before my grandfather and grandmother, whom I call my ancestors, or should I say my first ancestors. I rise before the deities, the land deities, the water deities, and the sky deities. I rise before the goddesses, especially the goddess Ma'at, to give me balance in conducting this interview, so that my guest and I can inform without offending any human being. I rise before the gods, especially the god Jehuti, the god who taught human beings how to read and write, to sharpen our eyes and tune our ears, so that we know what we see, understand what we hear. Finally, I rise before the Supreme Being, Amun-Re, whom my tradition calls Naswt, to grant us strength, wisdom, and staying power to complete this interview with success. With this prayer, I know I'm permitted to speak. In my introduction to African traditionalism, which was my first show, I made it clear that traditionalism is not located only in Africa, but in the diaspora as well. One of those traditions in the diaspora, as I stated, was Voodoo, tradition of Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Obeah in Jamaica, as well as Voodoo Hoodoo and Candomblé of Brazil. I also made it clear that all these traditions derive their rituals and practices from ancient Kemetic, Kushite, as well as Nubian traditions. Today, we are blessed to have a man of the cloth, a custodian of the secrets of human beings' connection to their creator. My guest is Naswt Ra Sankhu Kheper, the high priest of the Temple of Anu. He has authored several pamphlets, including The Wings of Kheper, From Ancient Legacy to Our Living Legacy. But most importantly, he recently authored The Art of Prayer, a Kemetic approach to invoking the divine, published by Dynasty Publications for the Temple of Anu 2010. Ra Sankhu Kheper, welcome to Divine Speech.
I'd like to first start by greeting you with the Kemetic greeting of Imhotep, which means I come offering peace and satisfaction, but I also want to say Dua'u Netru in Himamentu Hotep Tenu Hina-ek, which means thank the gods of our ancestors and may they be pleased with you.
Beautiful. If you don't mind, I would like to refer to you as Na. Naba, in my tradition, is king. And we don't call the Naba completely. As a form of reverence, we cut it, just say Na. So if we go in front of the king, that's what we say, Na. So if you don't mind, I would like to address you Na.
I'll be honored, do I not to?
Now tell us a little bit about yourself, your mission as leader of the Temple of Anu.
Well, our mission statement for the Temple of Anu, which I call my motto, or our motto, is from the ancient legacy to the living legacy. And that's taking practices and principles which our ancient Kemetic ancestors used from Northeast Africa, which we consider to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest civilization upon the planet. So we take the same practices which they use to empower themselves in their day and time, and take those very same practices and principles over here in Aminta, which we call the West, and empower ourselves. Now, far as a personal charge or mission, it comes from serious or deep introspection upon my life. And I had to think, and I had to ask myself, what is this life all about? Is it really about just being a better person? Is it about being a better husband or prospering in my job, or is there something bigger and greater propelling us forward in life? And in that contemplation, I got an answer in the form of a whisper, and it's told me, it says, you owe. So I say respectfully and humbly, what does this mean? I owe.
Right.
And it was communicated to me that millions of people before me have been tortured and died and denigrated, so people like Africans in America have the space to find themselves. Now, what does that mean, find themselves? We only have limited options in how we find ourselves in the Western world over here. We could find ourselves through living safely in status quo and constantly being impacted by the world, which is strictly governed by the descendants of our slave masters. Or we could pick the path of Sankhu, which is the return to the greatness, and serve as a living symbol of, or an icon that helps our people remember who they were, and you become a trailblazer in the world, and you impact the world and not be impacted by the world, while serving the dual function of possibly serving as a thorn in the side to the initial perpetrators of the injustices that's got us acting in this perceived contrary manner.
While reading one of your pamphlets, I discovered that you have made some journeys in your lifetime. I'm referring to the time that you were part of Islam. How did you make such a transformation from a relatively modern religious background back to ancient Kemetic teachings?
Well, in contrast, Islam is the newer of the two, but its discipline is inspired by ancient tradition. I believe that my time in Islam helped prepare me to appreciate and receive the traditions of the Kemetic legacy. So when I look at the 5 salatu, or the 5 prayers in the Islamic tradition, it prepared me for the 4 du'a'u in the Kemetic tradition. When I look at the wudu, purification or ablution ceremony that's done before the salatu or the prayers in Islam, it prepared me for the wabu, ablution, purification that is done before we do the du'a'u in the Kemetic tradition. I also recognize the connection on the emphasis of the Arabic language in Islam, which appeared to help me transcend the parameters of the limit, as well as the limitations of the English language, and it helped prepare my tongue for the pronunciation of the most sacred language that we call Medu Neter. And lastly, I look at the charge of a man in Islam to be a man of character, intelligence, and wisdom, and that helped me be able to receive not just the academic, but the moral, the wisdom text of the Kemetic legacy. So in all, I was blessed to have an open heart and open mind while I was in Islam, because it helped prepare me to come back home and bring home up to par. So even though Islam is the newer of the tradition, upon further reinvestigation of Islam, it re-inspires or recharges the ancient to resurrect the ancient, but I feel to be a necessary standard.
Now, in my first show, which was an introduction to African traditionalism, I made it clear that African traditionalism derives its practices and rituals from ancient Kemetic, Kushite, as well as Nubian belief systems. I could not be happy to be sitting across from you, a person well grounded in one of these belief systems. What entails ancient Kemetic traditions?
Well, there's several principles. The first is the belief and acknowledgement of what we call neter, or some people say neter or inter, which is our interpretation of God, which actually transcends the normal interpretation of God. Neter means everything that you can possibly perceive and everything that you cannot perceive. Neter is everything, yet it is no thing. So it is the acknowledgement of the Most High Creator. The second principle is the belief and the acknowledgement of what we call the Neteru, which are the divine beings that are charged by the Most High Creator to govern creation. 3 is we acknowledge our ancestors, they acknowledge the belief and acknowledgements of the accomplishments and the contribution of those who came before us. And 4 is belief and acknowledgement of high spiritual, moral, ethical, and philosophical teachings in the form of applied metaphysics, which we call culture. And lastly, initiation, which is a charge to us not only establish but maintain all of our traditions and keep them current and relevant.
In your book, now, The Art of Prayer, for short, you raise some sentiments, especially on authenticity, with the Hetu or the Kemetic spiritual houses within the tri-state area. Why was it necessary for you to bring that up?